With the addition of Imhotep and Egypt to Rise of Kingdoms, it's time to update the epic tier list to help you figure out which are the very best epic commanders to invest in Rise of Kingdoms. And for those of you that are new to the channel or seeing me for the first time, hi, I'm Chisgule Gaming. I have over 1,600 videos dedicated to making you a better Rise of Kingdoms player, so consider subscribing to the channel so you get daily videos delivered to your feed. Today's video is sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, and we're going to break down this tier list into two lists, actually. The first list is just overall effectiveness, battling against other players in Rise of Kingdoms. It will account a little bit for how they perform in Canyon, but is really mostly focused on open field fighting. The second list will get a look purely at Canyon performance. How does this commander work in Canyon? Because some commanders are not so great overall, but are way better in Canyon, especially at the epic tier. So I'll give you those two lists, and there will be timestamps in the description so that you can navigate to whichever portion of the video you're most interested in. Here's the tier list format we're going to be using today, ranking the commanders from S tier all the way down to D. S is the highest, D is the lowest. And also we'll rank them from left to right. The one on the left is the one I think is slightly better within each of these tiers. And let's kick things off with a bang. Let's pick some of the very best commanders. Egypt's Imhotep is absolutely amazing. Now you'll hear people say, oh, but he's not good for me. I don't know what you're talking about. And that's because they're dueling. That's because they are not actually using him in big brawls, which is where he's meant to be used. That is because he has a debuff that hits up to 5 targets. In fact, he has multiple debuffs. He makes targets take more damage, and he also is going to make it so that he reduces the rage of those targets, and rage reduction effects are actually kind of insane. Now, if you don't have Imhotep expertise, however, he is much lower quality. So keep in mind that this S grade is contingent on his being expertise. This is true with every commander here, but I will say, unlike the majority of these commanders, Imhotep really kicks it up a notch when he is expertise for the rage reduction addition that he gets to his kit. Also at the top, S tier, Joan of Arc, baby. Some people will upgrade from Joan of Arc to Trajan, and others will just stick with Joan of Arc for a very long time. Joan of Arc generates rage and does a bunch of buffs that are incredibly powerful. Once again, she's most valuable if you are bringing 5 marches to the battlefield or you are fighting in big groups. And if you're not fighting in big groups, you're not getting the full effect of her scaling, right? She's going to hit your 5 marches as a priority. And if you didn't bring 5 marches or there aren't 5 nearby, then she'll start to target some of your allies that are in the area. But if there aren't 5 total things, including her own march, you're definitely missing out on some of the value, and she would drop considerably. But because the biggest, most important fights are all big brawls, both of these commanders bubble up to the top, along with the lucrative and well-known Sun Tzu. I mean, look, the dude is amazing. He is, I think, the only epic commander to reduce damage taken, which is a very powerful effect, and give you health. And he gives you both of those benefits where most epic commanders give you like 10% attack and 10% defense. Sun Tzu is giving you 2 vastly superior stats, damage taken reduction and health. He also does area of effect damage and generates rage and boosts the skill damage of whatever other commander he's with. Sun Tzu is top tier, and for most people, they would say start with China, and because he's also good 1v1 and in group fights, many people would bubble him all the way over to the left side of this list, making him the very best epic. However, I will argue that because group fights are generally far more important, I would switch the priority more like this, but all 3 are really exceptional. Now, while we're talking about perhaps exceptional commanders, I should also put some not so exceptional commanders on this list. Don't use Lohar to fight. Don't do it. He's for battling barbarians, not even barbarian forts, just regular old run-of-the-mill, find them on the map barbarians. That's the beginning and end of his utility. Sometimes you will find that his hasty departure talents are rather nice for reinforcing a structure. So if you're hopping from city to city to city to get into a flag or a fort that's getting rallied, okay, fine. You might use him, assuming you didn't have a better commander available that also had hasty departure. Also, I'm just going to put the gathering commanders on here. They're not for fighting. They're for gathering. Maybe you can do some stuff with like, extra load capacity to loot a city, but this is more about fighting in big fights than how well a commander gathers. And a commander that also is really just for barbarians that isn't even available in the game to obtain anymore is Diao-Chan. If you played during a short window of time, you could unlock Diao-Chan. She's a peacekeeper. And unfortunately, although her active skill does 1,600 damage factor, it does that over the course of 4 seconds, which means you have to actually be connected with your target for the full 4 seconds. And if, for example, they walk away halfway through, then you've only done 800 damage factor. I so much prefer front-loaded instant proc where possible damage, okay? So Diao-Chan is fine, but I actually don't think she's all that great. And now we can get back to some of the great commanders, okay? Near the top of this list has to be Bjorn Ironside. He makes targets up to 3 take 15% more skill damage. He does have instant proc damage, and although the damage factor on him is a little bit low, that skill damage taken debuff is really important for big fights and group fights. I really like Bjorn Ironside, and I think he deserves a spot in the A portion of this list. Also shockingly good is Herman. Now, this really may come as a surprise because he's got a lot of mechanics on him that are far more advanced, but let me just run through this for you. He's got high damage factor. He silences the target and removes some of their rage. He generates rage. He increases his normal attack, which is the damage you deal to things when you directly target them, and your counterattack damage as well. Did I mention that he has March speed as well? I think I must have mentioned that already. His kit's actually really good. Like, if I were starting all over again, and I'm like, man, who do I pair with Esong? It might be Herman. It honestly might be Herman. He's very strong, and I think people would lose their mind if I didn't put Belisarius and Baibars up pretty high on this list, because there's just some ridiculous things you can do with this combo, using the mobility talents on the Belisarius to run around like a crazy person in the early game, smashing farmers both in KVK and also Home Kingdom Mightiest Governors. You're really not going to make any friends when you go and do this. You really aren't. But it does work, and this is not about a tier list for making friends, although I will say those commanders up at the top, right? People will like when you bring Emotep and Joan of Arc. They're going to be very happy you did that. Man, when you smash farmers, you really, really mark yourself as an enemy of the kingdom. And I will add Kira to this A portion of the list because the skill damage boost that she does is actually kind of nutty. The downside of Kira, even though she's a great commander, is that you can only get her from Soroli. And Soroli only comes around, I don't know, once or twice a month, and you're just not getting very many sculptures of her very quickly. By the time you can expertise her, you've graduated on from wanting to use her. So her role is a little bit tragic, with the exception of, okay, in Soroli battles, she boosts the skill damage taken of the target very dramatically. That's really important, but that's not really what this tier list is for. But for the open field, I mean, if you actually had her for KVK1, which you can't actually have her, she would be really good. So I'm going to rate her up there, but keep in mind, she's just really hard to obtain. Unfortunately, so slow that I just don't know that you'll get her by the time you really want to have her or use her. Which brings me to Scipio. Now, the prime version of Scipio, Legendary, is extremely good. The epic one is really more fine for Canyon and is just a punching bag. And he only really kicks into high gear when he gets super low. By that point, you wanted to get out of combat anyways, but you can't because Skippy is so slow. So there are really cool things you can do with Skippy, like really, really, really stupid things. We rallied a barbarian fort with Attila and Skippy, and you might think, that's dumb, what are you doing? But the enemy kingdom swarmed it, and they didn't realize we were up to no good, and the counterattack damage on Attila and Skippy and the damage taken reduction is so busted that we killed literally hundreds of thousands of their troops. Like, we took 5 million power off one player who was swarming that. And don't try to repeat this. It's like stupid stuff done in stupid KVKs. I'll put a card up in the top for the KVK where we used Skippy to do that. It was ridiculous and funny, but like, he's just not that great as a commander for open field fighting in general. Which brings me to Kusunoki, who is decent, except he has no march speed. I like that he clears debuffs, and I've used him in Canyon for a long time because of that. He's also a great city garrison because you are going to get hit with a lot of debuffs if you're getting swarmed. Now, ideally, you're just using a peace shield, but He is good if you are having to defend your city. I give him a B, right? He's not quite as good, I think, as the commanders in the A tier, but he is stronger than certainly all the bottom half, and he is good. He is a good commander, even as instant proc damage, okay? It's also damage over time. I think if his damage factor was higher, we could give him a higher rating, but it isn't. Which brings me to another solid commander, Olgi Mundok. And Olgi Mundok's also a good garrison for your city in the early game. When you're attacked, there's a chance you'll do just a ridiculous amount of damage back. And he does have a defense reduction effect, which is pretty cool. I like debuffs. But I just don't think that his power level is quite there with the other commanders that we've got in this list. And a part of his kit only really activates when he's getting hit, which is something you don't really want to have happen, because then you're going to get beat up pretty quickly, and then you got to take him off the field. From there, we've got some still really strong commanders. I'm going to put Pelagius right over here in the middle of the B tier, and he is good. He's got healing, he's got stats, he's got damage factor, and he even has a little bit of rage gen. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. This is maybe even something you should watch in a different time, the detailed mechanics of rage gen. I'll have a card up in the top and remind you of this at the end of the video to check this out, to learn the in-depth workings of rage, because he's going to generate 100 rage when an active skill is used, but in most cases, you won't actually get the benefit of it, which might sound weird, but it has to do with rage capping, the amount of rage you can get in any one turn. Without getting into that here, and I'll remind you of this video later, he's solidly a B. He's good all around, but I prefer the commanders that are above him. And I struggle with where I'm going to put Boudica, and I think I put her at the top of the C tier. Now, this might sound kind of weird to you. You might be like, whoa, Chisgule, but in your beginner guides, you say that Britain is one of the best starting civilizations because you get Boudica, and this is true. And Boudica is really, really, really good for helping level up these other commanders that you're going to really value for fighting with in the late game. However, she is extremely versatile and can be a secondary to any commander you've got on this list, which is a part of what is really strong for her. But I find she's a bit of a glass cannon, and in almost all cases, you prefer one of these commanders that gives you at least a little bit of defense. And most of these commanders that are ranked above her are giving you some defense. Defense is really important. So she is not rated as highly on the tier list purely because her real value is for getting experience onto commanders and battling barbs and being a versatile player for any of these commanders that you pretty much want to pair with. It's really the prime version of this commander, the legendary tier, that's completely insane. And no, there is not an upgrade path from the epic to the legendary. You obtain them completely separately from each other. Again, her role as an enabler in the early game smashing barbarians is through the roof, but once you get to like mid-game fighting, you're going to want to move away from her and use her more as a versatile secondary than, I mean, certainly you can't even use her as a primary commander because she's got the integration tree, and you do not want to talent any equipment for integration, which, by the way, brings us to one final commander, which is Osman. Now, Osman is really strong because on one of his skills, I believe it's the third skill, you do 400 extra damage factor every time an active skill is used. Now, every time a skill cycle happens, your rage bar gets full. Both the primary commander and the secondary commander use active skills, which means that skill doing 400 damage factor is going to trigger twice. That's a grand total of 800 extra damage factor. Now, he doesn't really do much else. I believe his active skill does 1,150 damage factor, plus another 800 damage factor every skill cycle, plus he's got 10% more troops, and a, unfortunately, tragically irrelevant city hitting skill. With the right rage engine, Osman's really powerful, but there aren't a lot of those sorts of rage engines. You would want to pair him with a commander that has ways of getting extra rage. Specifically, not when an active skill is being used would be the best way to make that work. But anyways, I'm going to bump him. I mean, it's either at the very top of B or maybe it goes somewhere in here at A. But because he's not really a standalone commander, he's not a linchpin commander, he's really depending on someone else to be there doing something cool to really enable him, I'm going to drop him in this case at the top of B. That's not to say you can't get more value out of him. You can. In a best case, if you're pairing with a commander that does generate rage, he can do well. But, you know, one of the best commanders to pair him with is Khan. Khan's legendary. And not only is Khan legendary, but he's also bad by the time you get to KVK Season 4 and beyond. So I think that he has a cool role, but I also feel like the opportunities to really exploit what he's doing are somewhat limited. Now that we've covered the overall value of each of these commanders, and again, some of them get more value in sort of special situations like Boudica or Osman, let's now cover the Canyon tier list. And the Canyon tier list is really important. I mean, if you care about that game mode, which, I don't know, some people get really triggered by this, and other people will say it doesn't at all represent real fighting, which is why this becomes a separate list. Let's put the commanders that are the very, very best up at the top at the start, and that is going to be Imhotep and Joan of Arc. Both of them are gangbuster. There are going to be 5 targets to hit, and that is perfect for their buffs and their debuffs. The downside of Imhotep is that his damage taken ability won't stack with Alexander the Great. So as soon as you have Alexander the Great in your lineup, you would remove Imhotep once you get Alexander the Great expertise. Similarly, Joan of Arc would be replaced by Trajan if you ever get Trajan, and some people never will. At the bottom of the list, Lohar should never see use in this game mode. Tamar of Georgia should never see use in this game mode. And you'll also find that commanders that do single target damage are really not all that great. You want area of effect damage. So at the bottom of this list, we've got Diao Chan. We've also got Boudica, although she's very versatile. You can use her in a bunch of different compositions. I'm gonna bump Osman around B. The reason that he does well is that extra troop capacity is really nutty in this game mode. It's like extremely valuable, above what you would normally get, so we'll put him in at the B. Getting back toward the top of this list again, we've got Sun Tzu. Area of effect damage is at a premium. Damage taken, reduction, and health are at a premium. So we are going to put him up near the top. Also, I'm going to put Bjorn Ironside up there. The reason that he belongs up near the top of this list is that the skill damage debuff is very important for a big fight like this. This is extremely valuable. Debuffs are much more valuable than usual. Also, more valuable than usual is going to be CPO. And I think I'm going to put him around B. Maybe at the top of B. And the reason is that he reduces damage taken. He gives you counterattack. He does cool stuff when he gets low, which in Canyon, you're going to run it all the way to the ground. That's how that works. And he brings extra troop capacity. He's actually like a great Canyon commander. Maybe I should even bump him up to an A, but I feel like that's a little bit aggressive, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I am going to put Kira and Kusunoki in that category. They have area of effect damage, and clearing debuffs is really good for Kusunoki. So I like both of those commanders at an A rating. I'm also going to put Baibars up there because I really like his area of effect damage. Now, granted, in the early game, depending on what you're using, if you've got some Cav commanders, some people go and they pick up Minamoto, and you might use a commander like Baibars as the secondary for the AoE damage. However, at some point, you'll replace those commanders with legendaries like Mehmed. This is especially true when you get to KVK Season 4 and beyond, but until you get to that point, a commander like Baibars is actually pretty solid. From there, we've got all commanders that do single target damage, and they're fine. They're just fine. I'm going to put Ulji Mundak, however, at a higher rating than usual. And you may be wondering, why is that? That is because his reactive sort of attack boost when he's getting hit is really good. There's a 10% chance when he's getting hit to boost it's either his damage or his attack by a lot. And in Canyon, you can control if he's getting hit. You put him in the front. So I really like Ulji Mundak for that role. Also, the defense reduction is pretty solid. I do like Herman, but his march speed is a lot less important here than it is in other places. The silence is kind of cool. It might be valuable. Rage reduction's good. But I think in general, you want your archers in the back line. So his normal attack boost is only going to give you a little bit of value. I guess the rage gen is good. But when I think about who do I want to pair with Isong, which is what I really think about for archers in Canyon, it's probably Kusunoki, it's probably Kira, it's not Herman. From there, what do we do with Belisarius? His debuffs are really good, and I like the 30% defense he gives and the bonus damage to targets that are weak. So I'm going to bump him up, but it's just hard to say how good he'll really be in this game mode. Like, there's things that are really strong for him, but his damage factor is so low. I feel like if you were running a strategy where you tried to group all 4 of your marches up against their off lane, and by the way, if you want like a very detailed Ultimate Canyon guide, I'll have a card up in the top and I'll remind you of that at the end of this video. But I feel like he's much better in that situation and not so great for just off-laning and 1v1. I don't know. It's debatable where he belongs here, but I think I'm going to drop him in there at B. And also in a very, very strangely strong B position is going to be Matilda. Where do I put her? Maybe even here. This is so weird, but Joan of Arc Matilda with all siege is just crazy good. It like works. I made a dedicated video to this on how outrageous this is. Card will be up in the top. You can go check it out. It's weird. She gives extra troop capacity, and it's really, really strong. Like, in siege stats, you can get a lot of them on blue gear. Without getting into all the details here, it's just got this really weirdly effective role. And Pelagius is, I feel like I'm doing Pelagius dirty here, but I'm just going to put him at the top of C. Like, he's got single target damage healing, a little defense, a little attack, a little rage gen. Like, he's fine, but not amazing. Really, really not amazing. And I will say, in the back lane, commanders like Boudica can do a lot of damage. They're extremely versatile. I mean, like, you can go Minamoto Boudica, super reasonable. You can go Isong Boudica, super reasonable. I mean, Boudica as a secondary to almost anybody is going to be pretty legit. However, when we talk about the best commanders possible for Canyon, I think this is where I'm at. For those of you that saw my list last year, you can see that my thoughts have evolved a fair amount, and consider subscribing to the channel for updates to my guides and videos with the latest and greatest information and my learning on what is and isn't working. Things often change a lot when new commanders come into the meta, and Imhotep definitely shakes things up. I'd say the biggest problem or challenge with Imhotep is that you want to pair him with an archer commander, and that's maybe the trickiest part of figuring out where to put him effectively into your Canyon lineup. In the early part of the game, I mean, sure, you could use Imhotep and Kusunoki, and you're like in a great position there. But once you bring in Isong, it gets kind of weird because like they work fine together, but you know, Isong's trying to boost skill damage and Imhotep doesn't do any skill damage. So there's a little bit of an anti-synergy there. If you have any thoughts, I definitely want to see them down below in the comments. And there were a couple videos that I told you about that you can go check out now by tapping the little info button up top, or there'll be a couple of them off to the side in just a second, showing you how you can learn about rage and take advantage of commanders like Sun Tzu and Pelagius in ways that you might not have expected. The Matilda combo that's absolutely insane will be there as well. And consider tossing a like on the video if you found this tier list helpful. Subscribing will get you daily videos for Rise of Kingdoms, which I create to help you smash your enemies and get value. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.